For our daily cancellation, we dive back into our country's racial hysteria in order to cancel NPR for this editorial just published yesterday, titled "Tom Hanks is a non-racist. It's time for him to be anti-racist." Now, Tom Hanks, as you may have heard, recently published his own editorial about the Tulsa race massacre, where he argued that the history we're taught focuses too much on white people and glosses over our racist past, basically making a similar argument to the one advanced by Joy Reid and Robert Reich in our opening. Tom Hanks, in fairness, though, is not as stupid as Joy Reid, but then again, Tom Hanks' volleyball in Castaway isn't as stupid as Joy Reid. Pretty low bar to get over. In any case, the point is that Tom Hanks is a white celebrity who wrote an op-ed to discuss the evil of racism and the alleged whitewashing of history and so on. If you haven't been paying attention, you might think that this would please the left-wing race activists. They'd be happy about it. They would say, "Oh, thanks, Tom Hanks, for supporting us." But because you haven't been paying attention, you don't realize that their whole game is to not ever be pleased by anything. And that's what gives rise to this article at NPR from a guy named Eric Deggans. Eric gives Hanks a nice pat on the head and a sticker for his effort, but then he explains that he's still very disappointed. He writes, quote, when I saw that Hanks had recently written a guest essay for the New York Times calling for more widespread teaching about the Tulsa race massacre, when white mobs in Oklahoma burned a prosperous black neighborhood to the ground in 1921, killing between 100 and 300 people, I was sincerely heartened. Now I thought we'll see him examine how his work so often focused on the achievements of virtuous white male Americans, and may have made it tougher for tales about atrocities such as Tulsa to find similar space. But he didn't fully go there. He then quotes a few lines from Hanks's piece, and then says, quote, "These are wise words. And it's wonderful that Hanks stepped forward to advocate for teaching about a race-based massacre, indirectly pushing back against all the hyperventilating about critical race theory that's too often more about silencing such lessons on America's darkest chapters. But it is not enough." And of course it isn't. It never is. Tom Hanks could have ran through the streets weeping and whipping himself and screaming, I'm sorry. And it still would not have been enough. But in this case, Tom Hanks had the audacity to not apologize at all. And Eric Deggans is quite upset about that. He continues, after many years of speaking out about race and media in America, I know the toughest thing for some white Americans, especially those who consider themselves advocates against racism, is to admit how they were personally and specifically connected to the elevation of white culture over other cultures. In other words, he is a baby boomer star who has built a sizable part of his career on stories about American white men doing the right thing. He's not alone. Superstar director Steven Spielberg has a similar pedigree, notwithstanding occasional projects like The Color Purple and Amistad, and fellow director Ron Howard. These stories of white Americans smashing the Nazi war machine or riding rockets into space are important, but they often leave out how black soldiers returned home from fighting in World War II to find that they weren't allowed to use the GI Bill to secure home loans in certain neighborhoods or were cheated out of claiming benefits at all. Yes, well, it would have been sort of strange to include that in Saving Private Ryan. Where would you have included the information about the GI Bill in Saving Private Ryan? What did he expect? Maybe we could have had the final scene of an old Matt Damon standing at Tom Hanks' grave, thinking about whether or not he had earned this. And then quickly, it would cut to a black man being denied use of the GI Bill. Then roll credits. Or better yet, they can do a remake of Saving Private Ryan where Matt Damon's character survives the war and then ironically becomes a Nazi, and at the end, he's assassinated by a black, disabled, non-binary lesbian ninja. I mean, I don't mean to give Hollywood any ideas, but this really is the point that the writer is making. He's angry that Tom Hanks portrays white people doing good things. White people are villains, Eric Deggans believes, and that is their rightful role in any film. To close out the piece, Deggans gives Hanks some homework assignments, or action items, to use modern parlance. He says, quote, if he really wants to make a difference, Hanks and other stars need to talk specifically about how their work has contributed to these problems and how they will change. They need to make specific commitments to changing the conversation in story subjects, casting, and execution. That's the truly hard work of building change. Rather than talk about the historically based fiction entertainment, what it must do, why not talk about what Tom Hanks, longtime scripted and documentary executive producer, will do? As a star who can get a movie made just by agreeing to appear in it, what will Tom Hanks, movie star, actually do? People often say columns such as the one by Hanks are published to start a conversation. Well, here's my suggestion. Let's make part of that conversation how baby boomer filmmakers have made fortunes amplifying ideas of white American exceptionalism and heroism. And now their responsibility now lies with helping dismantle and broaden the ideas that they help cement in the American mind. Yes, we wouldn't want to cement the idea that white people do good things. That's very dangerous, you know. It's dangerous to give people the impression that white people are capable of positive actions. The safest and best thing is to place an entire race of people in the villain role and keep them there. Because as we've seen through history, that always works out well, right? All of this, of course, is racist nonsense. This is a man who simply hates white people and can't contain it. And fortunately for him, he doesn't have to contain it. We can only imagine the reaction to an editorial arguing that there shouldn't be movies that amplify ideas of black heroism. Can you imagine that? An editorial about, Black Panther, where it's a white writer saying, this movie's a little problematic because it kind of gives this idea of black heroism, and I'm unsure about that, I think. Can you imagine that? You can't imagine it. Or rather, you can only imagine it because such an editorial could never actually be published. And even if it could, there isn't anyone who would be interested in writing it. But that doesn't satisfy Eric Deggans. Nothing ever can or will. It's not enough for Tom Hanks to denounce racism. He needs to actively demonize white people in his films. Eric has given Hanks his marching orders. His next movie must be a story about a wealthy white Republican oil executive discriminating against a bisexual Native American climate activist. And then in the end, he has to be thrown down an oil well. And as he's falling, he has to shout, "I'm white and evil and I'm sorry." Just to make sure the point was clear. Anything less than that, and Hanks will be a part of the problem. And the problem for Deggans is that there isn't enough anti-white sentiment out there. And there never will be. Because that's how it's all set up. And that's why NPR and Eric Deggans are most assuredly canceled. Listen, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it right now. I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.